Evelyn Harper did not cry when Barrett Holloway put her name on the poker table. The Iron Horse Saloon in Silver Creek, Montana, had seen men lose wages, horses, land, and blood across its green felt tables. But on an October night in 1884, Barrett ran out of everything he considered valuable and decided the 27-year-old woman who cooked his meals and kept his accounts would do instead. Evelyn sat against the wall in her wheat-colored dress, 3 careful men's hidden in its folds, her rough hands clasped so tightly her nails marked her palms. 6 months earlier, Barrett had found her washing other people's clothes for pennies and offered steady work, a roof, and the dangerous illusion that she mattered. Since then, he had paid her irregularly, gambled away what little he possessed, and reminded her whenever she objected that a woman with no family, money, or standing ought to be grateful for whatever place she was given. Now, drunk and cornered by a losing game, he unfolded a paper bearing her name and slapped it beside the chips. "Last thing I've got worth betting." Laughter came late, then spread. One man asked whether she was more trouble than she was worth. Barrett said she was manageable. Evelyn rose. Her knees felt weak, but her voice did not. "You cannot do this." Barrett barely looked at her. Already did. 5 men sat around the table. 4 treated the obscenity as entertainment. The 5th had said nothing. He was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, somewhere in his middle 30s, dressed like a rancher who had come into town for supplies and somehow ended up in a card game he did not particularly enjoy. His name, she would learn, was Wyatt Callahan. He was the only man in the room who had not laughed. The final hand went badly for Barrett. His 3-of-a-kind looked strong until Wyatt laid down the better hand without triumph. Men shouted. Coins scraped. Barrett went pale. Someone laughed that Callahan had won himself a housekeeper. Wyatt ignored him. He picked up Barrett's paper and read it while Evelyn stood waiting for whatever humiliation came next. Then Wyatt rose, tore the paper in 2, and dropped the pieces onto the table. "Nobody belongs to anyone." The room died quiet. Barrett protested that the contract was legal. Wyatt told him it had never been his to make. Then he walked toward Evelyn but stopped well beyond arm's reach. He did not tell her to come with him. He did not announce that she was safe because he now possessed what Barrett had lost. He said, "You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to go." That question, what did she want, shook her more deeply than the laughter had. She had prepared for anger, bargaining, even another man's claim. She had not prepared to be asked. Wyatt told her he owned a ranch 4 miles east, that there was a separate cabin with a lock and bolt on the inside, and that she could stay while she decided what came next. No conditions. Barrett would not take her back, and she had nowhere else to sleep. So Evelyn picked up the small bag containing nearly everything she owned and walked out of the Iron Horse without looking at Barrett again. Cold October air struck her face outside. Wyatt brought a wool blanket from his wagon and offered it without ceremony. When she climbed onto the seat, he took the reins and kept enough distance between them that she never had to wonder whether his kindness concealed another bargain. Silver Creek fell behind. The dark Montana country opened around them, grass silver beneath the stars and mountains massed black against the horizon. Evelyn's hands began shaking once the saloon was gone. She pressed them against her skirts. "Why?" she asked. Wyatt kept his eyes on the trail. His mother, he finally explained, had raised him to understand that legal and right were not always the same thing. She had been dead 12 years, yet he still heard her judgment whenever he was about to do something she would have disliked. Evelyn said she had not needed rescuing. "I was going to walk out." "I know," he answered. "You were handling it." She studied him, searching for mockery, and found none. She told him she could cook, mend, garden, and identify medicinal plants her grandmother had taught her to use. She was not helpless and would not become somebody else's burden. Wyatt nodded. His ranch already functioned. He was not offering employment disguised as mercy. He had space, food, and a door she could lock. That's all it is, if that's all you want it to be. Again, he made the choice hers. Evelyn said she would give the arrangement 1 week. The little cabin stood near the main ranch house and barn. Inside were a real mattress, 2 clean quilts, a fireplace already laid, a wash basin, a table, and the promised bolt. Wyatt lit the fire, showed her where the well was, then paused at the threshold with his hat in his hands. "You're safe here." He closed the door behind himself. Evelyn slid the bolt into place and stared at it. At 27, she had never had a room whose lock existed to keep other people out, rather than keep her contained by someone else's rules. She sat on the bed and finally allowed the shaking to take her. When it passed, she lay beneath the quilt, watching firelight move over the ceiling. "Nobody belongs to anyone." She repeated the words until exhaustion carried her under. She woke before dawn because years of instability had trained her body to expect footsteps outside a door. None came. In the main house kitchen, she found Silas Boone, a weathered ranch hand past 60, massacring eggs in a skillet. He looked at Evelyn, looked at his pan, and silently surrendered the spatula. By the time young Cody arrived, breakfast smelled better than anything the ranch had eaten in months. Wyatt entered last, already cold from morning chores, and stopped when he saw Evelyn at his table. "You didn't have to do this." Evelyn met his eyes. "I told you I work." She explained that she would not hide in the cabin while other people fed and managed her. Wyatt understood the distinction immediately. He did not thank her by assigning her a place. He merely accepted the place she was choosing. Within 3 days, she had found gaps in the ranch's routine and begun filling them. She organized the kitchen, mended worn clothes, and discovered a neglected garden behind the house. When she asked Wyatt who had tended it, his hands stilled on the leather tack he was repairing. "My wife." Before. Margaret Callahan had been dead for years. The loss explained some of Wyatt's silence. Not coldness, Evelyn realized, but the careful economy of a man who had learned that wanting something gave the world another place to wound him. Evelyn asked permission to restore the garden. Wyatt looked toward the dead beds. "It's been empty long enough." November was already closing in, too late for real planting, but she cleared roots, turned soil, and prepared the ground for spring. Cody followed her one morning and pointed to a weed she had saved. "Yarrow," she told him, "useful for bleeding." Her grandmother had taught her plants because doctors had been scarce where Evelyn grew up. Women like her grandmother had been medicine when no other medicine was coming. Cody immediately mentioned Silas's swollen knee. Evelyn found what she needed, made a compress, and within days the old man was walking more easily while insisting the weather had somehow become kinder. The ranch began to absorb her, not because Wyatt demanded service in exchange for shelter, but because usefulness, chosen freely, felt entirely different from usefulness demanded as proof of worth. Then Silver Creek came looking for her. Mrs. Crane arrived in a respectable wagon 9 days after Evelyn's arrival, and informed Wyatt that keeping an unrelated woman on his property would damage his reputation. Evelyn listened from inside the kitchen. Mrs. Crane's concern sharpened when she described Evelyn as the heavy woman Barrett Holloway had kept, and reminded Wyatt that she had no family or standing. Wyatt's voice stayed level. "Think carefully about the next thing you say." Mrs. Crane tried to frame cruelty as advice. Wyatt dismissed it. When he came inside, Evelyn asked why gossip did not change the arrangement. Most men would find an easier way out. Wyatt considered that before answering. "Easy ain't always right. I learned that a while ago." He had once let ease excuse things he should have done, he said, and had no intention of adding Evelyn to that list. Before returning outside, he took something from the shelf, an old seed catalog filled with handwritten notes, Margaret's notes, which beans preferred which corner, where the afternoon shade fell, which varieties disappointed her. Evelyn understood what he had placed in her hands. This was not simply gardening information. Wyatt had carried the catalog through years, when he could neither throw it away nor open it. Now he was giving another woman permission to use it without asking her to erase the first. Hope frightened Evelyn more than hostility ever had. Barrett had once offered hope too, and she had paid dearly for believing him. But Barrett's hope had always come attached to what he expected from her. Wyatt's came as a key, an untouched boundary, a seed catalog, and room to decide. Her promised week became 9 days, then 11. One evening she caught herself drawing the spring garden 5 months before spring could arrive. She folded the plan into Margaret's catalog and stopped pretending her staying was temporary. 2 days later, a rider brought a document from Silver Creek. Barrett had spent the weeks since the poker game telling anyone who would listen that Wyatt had stolen what belonged to him. He had bought whiskey for influential men and found Douglas Dunmore, a corrupt contract assessor willing to dress almost any grievance in official language. Dunmore's notice ordered Evelyn to appear at a public proceeding in 4 days, so Barrett's supposed labor contract could be resolved. Wyatt handed her the paper immediately, rather than hiding it, until he had decided what to do. Evelyn read it twice. Could he take me back? He's going to try. Wyatt did not insult her with false certainty. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure he doesn't. Fear tightened beneath Evelyn's ribs. She looked at the dark soil she had prepared for spring. Then we'd better figure out what we're going to do. Wyatt rode to town, spoke to Sheriff Aldridge, and sent for an opinion from a legitimate attorney in Billings. Silas announced he was attending the hearing because he had lived in the valley long enough to remind certain men what they used to claim they believed. Cody, 20, and painfully aware that he possessed no authority at all, said he could at least stand in the room. Evelyn prepared differently. She worked. Bread, preserves, medicinal preparations, root cellar inventories, anything that let her hands stay useful while her mind waited. Late one night, Wyatt found her staring at the same page of Margaret's catalog without reading it. Evelyn admitted what frightened her. Barrett was counting on the room, seeing what people had always seen. A poor woman, with no relatives, no money, a large body, others considered undesirable, a servant who had been treated like an object so often that objecthood might seem natural. Wyatt asked what she intended to do. Walk in anyway. Then she told him something else. She would speak for herself. She would not enter the courthouse merely to be rescued by another man. Wyatt's answer came without offense. I wouldn't have it any other way. Silver Creek packed the courthouse. Dunmore spoke first, burying Barrett's cruelty beneath phrases about labor obligations, transferred agreements, and breach of service. Barrett sat dressed like a man already savoring victory. Wyatt answered with the Billings attorney's written opinion. No employment agreement could be transferred through a gambling debt, and certainly not without the worker's consent. Barrett jumped up, insisting he had fed Evelyn and housed her for 6 months. Sheriff Aldridge ordered him down. Then Evelyn stood. The same kind of silence that had filled the Iron Horse settled over the room. She told them exactly what had happened. She had cooked Barrett's meals, cleaned his house, and managed accounts he was too irresponsible to keep himself. He had paid less than promised, and not always on time. When he ran out of money, he wrote her name on paper without asking her, and tried to settle a gambling debt with her future. She had been ordered to sit down while men decided what would happen to her. I am not asking this court whether Mr. Holloway was embarrassed when he lost a poker hand, she said. I'm asking whether losing one gave him the right to decide where I live. Dunmore tried to interrupt. I wasn't speaking to you. A startled sound moved through the room. Silas rose next. His argument was simpler than Dunmore's legal vocabulary. If Silver Creek decided a woman's labor made the woman herself transferable property, every man present ought to ask whether he wanted his daughter living under that law. That changed the room. Barrett felt it. His face hardened. Desperation entered his voice. Wyatt did not threaten him. He calmly pointed out that if Barrett believed Evelyn owed wages or notice, he could file a wage dispute like anyone else. What he could not do was claim the worker. Sheriff Aldridge chose the ruling that law, common sense, and the mood of the room had finally made unavoidable. The contract was unenforceable. Evelyn's labor could not be transferred without her consent. Barrett's only possible remedy was an ordinary wage claim. The gavel fell. Barrett stared across the room at Evelyn, and for one unguarded second she saw shame. Not repentance, not transformation, simply knowledge. He had known from the beginning that what he had done was wrong, and had spent weeks purchasing language, witnesses, and whiskey in the hope of creating a world where wrong became lawful, because enough men agreed to call it so. That world had collapsed. Evelyn felt no great triumph. Mostly she felt tired. Outside, Wyatt said, "Let's go home." Home. She let the word stand. Mrs. Crane stopped her before she left, and awkwardly admitted that Evelyn had spoken well. It was not yet an apology, but it was farther than the woman had traveled before. Evelyn accepted it without offering absolution Mrs. Crane had not requested. On the courthouse steps, she warned Wyatt that Barrett might not be finished. "I'm not asking you to fight my battles. I'm standing next to you," he said. "That's not the same thing." Then, more quietly, "I'm not going anywhere." The week after the hearing settled into winter routine. Barrett left Silver Creek after loudly promising revenge, but his departure did not bring Evelyn the old relief of escaping danger. Something more important had changed. Before the courthouse, every silence between her and Wyatt had contained a carefully maintained distance. Afterward, neither seemed to need that distance so badly. He sat beside her while she revised the spring garden plan and helped map where the barn shadow crossed the beds. He lingered after supper for another cup of coffee. She borrowed his books. When she returned one, another appeared on the table. They disagreed about them over breakfast. Silas watched with the patient expression of a man who had understood something long before either participant admitted it. One evening, Evelyn asked about Margaret's roses. Wyatt told her his wife had tried for 2 years to grow them where the soil was wrong. Margaret had known by the second season they might fail, and planted them anyway, because she needed to know for certain. They had married in 1878, and spent 7 years together. Margaret died at 29. Wyatt spoke slowly at first, then more freely, as Evelyn asked what she had been like, rather than offering another useless apology for her death. He remembered her stubbornness, her humor, her opinions, the ways she had made the ranch less quiet. When he finally stopped, the coffee had gone cold. "I haven't talked about her like that in a long time." "You should," Evelyn said. "She sounds worth talking about." His almost smile surfaced. "You're a strange woman, Evelyn Harper." Coming from him, it was the kindest thing she had heard in years. Snow closed around the ranch in December. The buildings seemed to pull closer under white fields and low skies. Evelyn had once feared close quarters because confinement with people who held power over her had always meant listening for moods and learning how small to make herself. At the Callahan Ranch, winter intimacy meant something else. Silas lost at cards to Cody and blamed the deck. Wyatt read by the fire. Evelyn cooked soup and argued about books. Boots dried near the stove. Men coming in half-frozen from fence work found hot food waiting, and Evelyn found that nobody treated the food as a debt she owed them. One ordinary afternoon, while soup simmered and Silas slept beside the stove, Evelyn realized she was happy. That made the next news dangerous in a new way, because now she possessed something she could lose. Cody brought it before breakfast. Barrett was in Billings. He had stopped hiring men to manipulate contracts and started hiring men who settled disputes with fists and guns. 3 names had been mentioned, men with reputations serious enough that Cody's source had ridden through snow to send warning. Evelyn's first thought was practical. "I could leave." Wyatt stopped her before she could build the argument. Barrett was not angry because she lived on this ranch. He was angry because he had lost. If she disappeared, he might follow her, or punish Wyatt anyway, or simply learn that threatening people was enough to make everyone rearrange themselves around him. You leaving doesn't end this. But Silas could get hurt. Cody could. You could. The words exposed more than she intended. Wyatt heard it. He asked her one question. Do you want to be here? Not whether leaving was safer. Not whether she felt she owed them sacrifice. Did she want to stay? Evelyn looked around the kitchen. Margaret's catalog rested on the shelf. Her herb jars lined the wall. Cody's gloves lay where she had mended them. Silas's coffee cup sat in the place he used every morning. She remembered Wyatt sitting beside her in the courthouse, silent because she had asked to speak first. "Yes," she said, "I want to be here." "Then we deal with Barrett together." They prepared rather than panicked. Wyatt alerted neighboring ranchers. Silas sent word to men who knew the Billings outfits. Cody checked travelers passing through Jensen's hardware. Rifles were cleaned and placed where they could be reached, but Wyatt refused to turn the ranch into an armed camp. Cattle still needed feed. Fires still needed wood. The cold did not care that dangerous men might be coming. Waiting proved harder than action. At 2 one snowy morning, Evelyn found Wyatt at the kitchen table, studying a map of the ranch approaches. He made coffee. She asked how he stayed calm. "I'm prepared," he said. "That's different from not being worried." "Worry," he explained, "was letting something hurt you before it arrived. Preparation was doing whatever could reasonably be done and refusing to surrender the remaining hours to fear." Evelyn understood. She had spent years learning not to show fear because too many people used visible fear as leverage. "What's louder than the fear now?" Wyatt asked. She looked at him across the low lamp flame. "This kitchen," she said. "Sitting here at 2 in the morning with a man who makes coffee and asks what I think. That's louder than Barrett." Wyatt went still. Then he reached across the table slowly enough that she could move away if she wished, and rested his hand over hers. Evelyn turned her hand beneath his and held on. Neither called it love, neither needed to. The 3 men from Billings arrived on a Friday beneath a hard gray sky. They rode openly up the main track and stopped in the yard. Wyatt was waiting. Silas stood inside the house with a rifle. Neighbors watched from beyond the nearest rise. Evelyn stepped outside. Wyatt glanced at her. She recognized the argument in his face and the decision not to make it for her. The leader told Wyatt that Barrett had paid them to settle a debt. Evelyn came to stand at Wyatt's side. "I'm Evelyn Harper. I assume Barrett told you about me." The leader studied her. She asked whether Barrett had also mentioned losing a public hearing in Silver Creek, whether he had explained that a legal opinion from Billings had supported the ruling, whether he had mentioned trying to use a poker debt as ownership of a human being. The man's certainty weakened. He looked at Wyatt. "That true?" Every word. Evelyn did not threaten them. She gave them facts. Barrett had already lost publicly, and whatever money he offered now was payment to continue a grievance the law had settled. 3 professional hard men would be taking all the risk for the pride of a gambler whose judgment had already cost him everything. The leader glanced at the house, the property line, his own companions. "We ain't getting paid enough for a legal dispute." "I reckon you're not," Wyatt said. The riders turned away. Only after they vanished down the road did Evelyn begin shaking. Wyatt's palm rested lightly against her back. No grip, no attempt to steer. "You're shaking. I know. You didn't show it. I know that too." Inside, Silas had already returned the rifle to its place. Cody looked several years older than he had that morning. Silas announced he was making soup as though nothing of consequence had happened. Evelyn sat. Wyatt sat beside her rather than across the table. "You were next to me," she said. "That's where I intend to stay." For the first time, she understood the full difference between protection and possession. Barrett had called control care because he needed her smaller than himself. Wyatt's protection created room around her. He stood beside her without standing in front of her. He offered strength without demanding obedience in payment. Barrett never returned. Reports drifted through the territory for several months. Miles City, another saloon, another debt, another hurried departure, then faded entirely. Evelyn stopped listening. Barrett's absence was no longer the measure of her freedom. Spring was. When March softened the frozen ground, she went outside with Margaret's seed catalog and the plan she had drawn during those first uncertain weeks. Wyatt had already turned the east bed for her. He had done it without announcement because that was the language he spoke best. Fences mended before they broke. Wood stacked before a storm. Coffee placed beside a sleepless person. Soil prepared before planting. "You didn't have to do that," Evelyn told him. "I know." The garden came alive. Greens first, then beans and squash. Medicinal beds of yarrow, elderflower, echinacea, valerian, and lavender. Cody followed her through them with questions and began keeping a notebook of everything she taught. When he cut his hand one afternoon, Evelyn found he had already cleaned the wound, packed it correctly, and bandaged it with the technique she had shown him. "You did it right." His satisfaction was impossible to conceal. Her grandmother's knowledge, carried through poverty and loss in a book Evelyn had protected since 16, was moving into another generation. Knowledge shared survived. That mattered to her more than she could explain. Then Mrs. Crane returned. Her 7-year-old niece had been feverish for 3 days, and the town doctor was away. Mrs. Crane sat at Evelyn's kitchen table, with none of her former certainty. Evelyn asked questions, selected preparations, and wrote exact instructions. Only when everything necessary for the child had been handled did Mrs. Crane speak of the past. "I was wrong." The admission clearly cost her. Evelyn did not punish her for the effort. Nor did she pretend the earlier cruelty had never happened. "Give your niece the elderflower preparation every 4 hours. Make sure she drinks." Mrs. Crane left with the medicine. The child recovered. After that, other people began arriving at the Callahan Ranch. A rancher's wife with a cough, a child with a stubborn rash, old Walt Pruitt with a backache he had denied for a month. Evelyn treated what she knew how to treat and refused to pretend knowledge she did not possess. Payment arrived in frontier currency: potatoes, preserves, cloth, help with repairs, sometimes coins. Slowly, the valley that had once discussed her as Barrett Holloway's unwanted servant began referring to Miss Harper when somebody was sick and the doctor was too far away. Wyatt watched without taking credit. Sometimes she caught him standing in the kitchen doorway while a neighbor listened to her instructions. Pride showed in his face, quiet and unmistakable. By May, Evelyn was no longer living at the ranch because she had nowhere else to go. She was there because she had chosen it. One evening after supper, she and Wyatt sat on the porch while the last light burned along the Montana horizon. Silas and Cody had gone to the bunkhouse. The garden smelled of damp soil and young plants. Wyatt held a cup of coffee he had forgotten to drink. "I want to ask you something." Evelyn waited. "And before I ask, the answer doesn't change anything. Not your place here, not your room, not the garden, nothing." Her breath caught. Wyatt looked directly at her. "Evelyn Harper, will you marry me?" No contract lay between them. No audience waited to approve. No necessity forced her answer. The freedom to say no was the very thing that made yes possible. She thought of the saloon, of the paper tearing between Wyatt's hands, the bolted cabin, Margaret's seed catalog, her spring plan, the courthouse, coffee at 2 in the morning, 3 dangerous men riding away because she had stood in front of them and spoken for herself. She thought of Margaret planting roses in bad soil because something worth trying deserved an honest attempt. She had spent most of her life protecting the last part of herself no one had managed to take. Perhaps trust was not surrendering that part. Perhaps it was choosing where to place it. Yes. Wyatt closed his eyes for half a second and released a breath that sounded as though he had been carrying it all winter. She put her hand over his. He turned his palm beneath hers. They married in June on the porch where he had asked. Silas stood with Wyatt. Cody stood with Evelyn because she had no family present, and because, by then, he was exactly whom she would have chosen if she had possessed 100 relatives. Mrs. Crane attended with her recovered niece. The ceremony was small. Wyatt spoke his vows the way he did everything important. Plainly, without performance, looking only at Evelyn. Silas cried while pretending not to. Cody compensated for his own emotion by eating enough wedding supper for several men. Summer filled the ranch. Evelyn harvested medicinal plants and began writing her grandmother's remedies into a new journal Wyatt quietly bought at Jensen's. Soon the journal contained more than inherited recipes. It held Evelyn's own observations about altitude, soil, cold, dosage, and the specific plants of their valley. She realized one August afternoon that she was making something meant to outlive her. She was writing it for Cody. She would tell him when the time was right. Barrett's name became less common in Silver Creek. Eventually, someone heard he was managing a dry goods store in Colorado. Evelyn felt almost nothing at the news. Once, indifference would have seemed impossible. Now Barrett occupied so little of her life that resentment itself felt like wasted space. October brought a heavy harvest. The root cellar filled with potatoes, squash, preserves, herbs, and enough food to make winter seem less like an enemy and more like a season requiring preparation. Silas inspected Evelyn's organization and announced that it looked all right, which everyone understood as extravagant praise. On the last evening of the month, Evelyn stood at the kitchen stove stirring soup. Wyatt came in from the barn, washed at the basin, and took his familiar place beside her. "Smells good. It always smells good." "It does." She smiled. After a moment, he said, "Been thinking about a year ago." She stopped stirring. Almost exactly 12 months had passed since the Iron Horse. Wyatt admitted he had not intended to play poker that night. He had gone to Silver Creek because the ranch house had become unbearable in its silence. Since Margaret's death, he had learned to endure loneliness so well that he had mistaken endurance for a life. Sitting at that table had seemed like one more meaningless evening. Then Barrett had unfolded a piece of paper with Evelyn's name on it. "I used to think ending up there was bad luck," Wyatt said. "And now?" He considered the question. "Grace, maybe." Evelyn looked at him. "The kind that shows up in the wrong place at the right time." She thought of the frightened woman sitting rigid in the corner of the Iron Horse, while men decided how little she was worth. She remembered promising herself that the poker table would not be the end of her story. It had not been. The ranch that once belonged to Wyatt and the memory of Margaret now held more life, without holding less memory. Margaret's handwriting still lived in the seed catalog. Her failed roses remained part of Wyatt's history. Evelyn had never needed to defeat a dead woman to be loved by the man who had loved her. Healing had not required forgetting. It had required making enough room for grief and hope to occupy the same house. Silas no longer ate his functional eggs alone. Cody could identify yarrow on sight and treat a wound before help arrived. People from Silver Creek came to Evelyn's kitchen because they trusted her hands and judgment. The garden waited beneath the autumn soil for another spring, and Wyatt no longer entered a house too quiet to bear. Evelyn reached up and touched his face. "So do I," she said. Outside, frost silvered the fields. Horses shifted in the barn, warm beneath blankets. Somewhere in the bunkhouse, Silas was probably losing money to Cody and insisting the cards were crooked. The kitchen fire breathed steadily. Soup simmered. Margaret's seed catalog rested on a shelf beside Evelyn's growing journal. A year earlier, Barrett Holloway had called Evelyn Harper the only thing he had left worth betting, because he believed worth was something a man could assign, reduce, transfer, or lose. Wyatt Callahan had won the hand and refused the prize. That refusal had given Evelyn something no possession ever could have given her: choice. Everything afterward had been built from it. The locked door she could open whenever she wished. The work she chose because it mattered. The garden she planted because she expected a future. The courtroom where she used her own voice. The dangerous men she faced while Wyatt stood beside her. The knowledge she passed to Cody. The neighbors who learned to see the woman they had once dismissed. The marriage she entered, because saying no had always remained possible. Wyatt had never treated her like a queen, because he thought she needed a throne. He did something rarer. He treated her dignity as ordinary. Her thoughts required no special permission to matter. Her boundaries required no justification. Her strength did not threaten his. Her fear did not make her weak. Her body was neither an embarrassment to overlook, nor an object to possess. Her skills belonged to her. Her decisions belonged to her. Her future belonged to her. And because he understood all of that before asking for her love, she could give it without losing herself. The woman who arrived carrying everything she owned in one small bag became the heart of a ranch without ever being required to disappear inside it. The lonely rancher who sat down at a poker table because he could no longer bear another silent evening learned that opening a door for someone else could open his own life again. Their home did not become warm because suffering had magically vanished. Winters remained hard. Animals became sick. Crops sometimes failed. Old grief still visited. There would be illnesses Evelyn could not cure, and losses Wyatt could not prevent. But hardship was no longer something either faced alone. That was the healing. Not rescue, not ownership, not forgetting. Belonging by choice. On that cold Montana night, a year after the cruelest room Evelyn had ever entered, the Callahan Ranch stood beneath an enormous field of stars, windows glowing against the dark. Inside, two people remained beside the stove until the soup was ready. And this time, neither of them was waiting for the other to leave.